Hello, this is Skylit Lake reading Long Night in the Valley by Maraleus. Chapter 3. A mind-affecting quirk? Asked the secretary. Are you sure? Positive, said Recovery Girl grimly. If I had realized, I would never left him alone while I reviewed the scans. I thought it was something physical. By the time we looked up and down the campus, he was already gone. The secretary found herself shaking slightly, even retired, even barely able to use his quirk. The idea of All Might under mind control, under a villain's control, was terrifying. I'm going to put you through to the chairman, she said, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. I am sure he'll mobilize every available resource. She pressed the button, sagged in her chair, glad she didn't have to make real decisions. Then, the calls from the people in charge of the Mustafa mental invasion training activity started to roll in. As she answered the phone, she couldn't help but think that All Might probably would have benefited from the training. Of all the things Suyu had expected to see while waiting to be directed to a room for testing, Midoriya fleeing from the group of heroes was not one of them. True, Midoriya had yet to come out of a class trip or event without some kind of trauma, but she'd been expecting villains to be the cause, not whatever this was. Kaminari and Aoyama walked forward, only to be held back by Shoji, who just barely managed to catch his phone. He'd been playing a Pokemon game with Koda. Hey, what gives, man? Midoriya's in trouble. Yes, said Shoji quietly, the lips on his extra arms barely moving. And look at who he's in trouble with. We can't go barreling in, agreed Tsuyu. We need to find the rest of the class before getting out of here. After all, if one member of 1A was in trouble, they all were. I have a better idea, he said. What do you think to a sparkling distraction to help our friend and us escape? Suyu followed his gaze and swallowed in a sigh. People should really stop leaving electrical boxes out in the open like that. This is basically a signed invitation. Izuku did not notice the power outage that occurred a mere fraction of a second after he burst out of the center's doors, but if he did, he would have been grateful for the chaos it caused and the precious time it bought him. That is the room they were in, said Fumikage, dark shadow screening him and the rest of his class from you. Hagikore should be... He hesitates. There, he said finally. Are you sure we should go after them? Asked Mineta. I mean, it's Aizawa-sensei and the top of the class. Since Midoriya is the only one who came out, Yaoyorozu coolly said, it's probably that they're either asleep or heavily outnumbered, especially considering how out of character it was for Midoriya to leave them behind. Unless he was targeted and was trying to draw them away, said Sato. They considered that silently for a moment. Bakugo's group was in that room, pointing with an earjack. They'll definitely be asleep by now. Not to back away from a fight, but if we really think our class is in danger, we should get them out first. Only because they're not the center of this. The fate of Bakugo, much like Midoriya, is often shrouded in darkness. I hate how you have a point, said Jiro. Yeah, Momo, you're kind of in charge in here. I think it's your call. Yorozu made a pained-looking face. We need to find everyone who hasn't gone into a room yet. We need to gather information, she said. Maybe this is just a misunderstanding. Fumikage, for one, doubted it. T-shirt and a bright yellow backpack. Ochako swallowed uneasily and looked back at Suzuki. Did Deku's appearance reflect his understanding of the situation? Did he think that what was going on, what happened then? Was he right? A part of her, a part that was very used to Aizawa's logical ruses, was still hoping this was part of a course. "We already have proof you're the traitor," wheezed Suzuki, despite sustaining so many wounds. Beyond being out of breath, he was currently unharmed. Even his suit only had a few streaks of dirt on them. "Deku is not the traitor," shouted Uraraka. "He's risked his life for us so many times. He's hurt himself so much. It's ridiculous you could even think of that." Alright, perhaps the fight and general situation had Ochako more on edge than she'd thought. Or perhaps she was just tired of this jerk bad-mouthing one of their best friends. "I think," said Aizawa, splitting his attention between Suzuki and the new Deku, "that anyone who actually knew Midoriya would tell you that the same thing, assuming you asked." "What are you here for? What are you really here for?" asked Deku. "Are you really working for the commission?" Suzuki wrinkled his nose momentarily, apparently affronted, then started to laugh. "You think we didn't? They came to us. Aldera Middle School ring any bells? Why didn't you tell your new friends you used to be—" He cut off as Deku moved past them, smoothly dodging Aizawa-sensei and performing a textbook perfect takedown of Suzuki, complete with handcuffs and avoiding Suzuki's skin. What was Suzuki's quirk anyway? "Wish I could have done this back then," muttered Deku, hauling Suzuki around. "What is your problem?" "You can't hurt me," said Suzuki. "Are you scared of the truth?" Aizawa pulled Deku away from Suzuki. "Midoriya," he said. "You are Midoriya, right?" Deku's face scrunched up. "I think so. I think it's more complicated than it should be." Ochako saw Suzuki get up before Aizawa did and leaped forward, aiming for his face. She missed. Suzuki's fingers brushed against Deku's cheek, and the world shredded around them. Aizawa had known going into this that a dream world would be, almost by definition, illogical and annoying. He simply underestimated how illogical and annoying. Oh, the fight with maybe Midoriya was straightforward enough, even factoring in his controlled environment, but the environment was another story. Aizawa knew he'd been hit. He'd been hit solidly several times, yet he didn't feel so much as a bruise. He was also, for some undefinable reason, wearing a suit. His students, except for Midoriya, who had disappeared yet again, had been put in an unfamiliar school uniform. Speaking of which, they are now standing in front of the middle school, the beach nowhere in sight. Adding that to the fact that at least some items, e.g. Midoriya's handcuffs, seemed to disappear when no one was paying attention to them, Aizawa's headache was rapidly going. Not to mention, he practically admitted he wasn't Midoriya. "What more do you want?" demanded Suzuki, who seemed to ignore the fact that he was being stared down by 3 hostile, combat-trained teenagers. "I want," said Aizawa, "to wait out the clock. Midoriya isn't attacking us anymore, and I don't particularly feel the need to snoop around in his head." Suzuki's eye twitched. "Saito isn't waking us up until the end of the course, a full 6 hours from now. You want us to have this standoff for the 6 hours? Or do you want to find something that will help you protect the rest of your little gremlin students?" "What do you mean, until the end of the course?" demanded Ida, adjusting his glasses. "She's supposed to let us out in an hour." Aizawa sighed, but kept his gaze fixed on Suzuki. Ida could be a little too fixated on the rules sometimes. "So? No one will miss you until lunch break, and that can be easily covered up." "So, we should call the school too," decided Momo. I think Principal Nezu likes Midoriya. Huh? Really? Said Saito, surprised. Momo nodded. Whenever Midoriya is brought up at student council meetings, he sort of chuckles. He does that with Aizawa-sensei too. Come to think of it, and All Might. That's terrifying, said Mineta. No one said anything because they didn't really want to agree with Mineta, even about something so mundane. Sirens from the ambulance called for Saito Yumi were just audible in the distance. Somewhat farther away, the principal of UA realized that calling the Hero Commission about Yagi's disappearance might have been a tactical error. In the Hero Commission's headquarters, the chairman determined that no, this is not going to be covered up easily, and started making alternate plans. Aizawa speaking says, "Then we'll have to wait for a whole 6 hours. Consider it endurance training," he told the students, "for stakeouts and whatever." "And whatever?" said Todoroki. "If you have to deal with this nonsense now as students, it's only gonna get worse when you're pros," said Aizawa. "Ah," said Todoroki, nodding sagely. "I see. Look, if you're all so sure he has nothing to hide, what's the harm in looking?" Cutting off whatever response the three of them were about to snap out. "Do not engage him. This is going to be a very long 6 hours. Or 5. It had to have been at least 1 hour since they went under, right? It had to be, if the universe was fair." "Oh, who's kidding?" Suzuki sighed, closed his eyes, and straightened his tie. "I apologize," he said. "The appearance of that prediction unsettled me, and I have not fully explained why the Hero Commission has decided to act as it has in the case of Midoriya Izuku." "Who cares? The commission sucks," exclaimed Todoroki. Undeterred, Suzuki continued, "I'm sure you all have noticed that Midoriya displays 2 quirks." "So do I and Izawa-sensei." "I what?" "Your floating hair thing. That's just an emitter effect," said Aizawa. "But it works on your capture weapon," said Todoroki. "Midoriya showed me a diagram once. It was very convincing. He said not to bring it up though, because you are probably hiding it from villains." "Oh," he trailed off as he looked back at Suzuki. This was not, Aizawa reminded himself sternly, time to have an existential crisis. He was having a talk with Midoriya when he got out of this. A secondary quirk that he only discovered in high school? You must see how far-fetched this is, not to mention his first quirk only. The ground rumbled abruptly. They were surrounded by bright, approximately human-shaped blurs of color. Because, why not? Among those blurs of color ran tiny middle school Midoriya. Because again, why not? Using the distraction and something that had to be related to either a quirk or Suzuki's great experience with Saito's quirk, Suzuki escaped from their little circle and ran after Midoriya. Aizawa's students, and thus Aizawa, followed. "Come again?" asked Vlad King, rubbing the inside of his ear. "I think I must have misheard you." "Yagi stole your car," repeated Paoloda, completely done with the world. Vlad, still uncomprehending, blinked up at his co-worker. "Is there like a student called Yagi?" he asked, trying to process the diametric opposed concept of Yagi and stole before even getting started on your car part of the sentence. "No." With despair, his mind finally registered that the simpler piece had stolen his car. "But he doesn't even drive." Vlad King's car was objectively rather terrible. It was antique, almost 150 years old, manufactured when regulations were loose in a wake of the dawn of quirks. It was loud, it was ugly, the gas efficiency was terrible, and came at the cost of high emissions. The air conditioner was broken, and it had no backup camera. It had 3 things going for it. 1, it had a functional safety system. 2, the ceiling was high enough for Toshinori to fit. 3, it had no GPS or tracking attached to it. True, the vehicle's other features meant that the car would be remembered and tracked sooner or later, but the point of this exercise was to get to Izuku as quickly as possible, then away from the pursuers as quickly as possible. They'd leave the car somewhere after that, perhaps with the key still in it, perhaps somewhere disreputable. That would be rather mean to Vlad. Thought someone who may or may not have been Toshinori. They were doing him a favour, honestly. It was a good thing 6 knew how to drive. 7 and 5 with their fancy mobility-oriented quirks were useless. Don't even get him started on Mr. I'm gonna live in the woods and isolate myself from society and Miss. Driving laws can't change that much in 150 years. Unbelievable. Toshinori stopped the car. The back door opened and Izuku slid in. He shut the door and Toshinori started driving again. They didn't speak to one another because they didn't have to. Izuku started undressing, pulling on the clothes Toshinori had picked up for him quickly. Hero merchandise, mostly, bright but anonymous. Few would expect fugitives to wear something like this. It's soft, whispered Izuku, rubbing the edge of the hoodie between his fingers. I'm glad you liked it, said Toshinori in the rearview mirror. Toshinori could see Black Whip twine around his hands and wrists protectively. His headache let up slightly. They'd hide until the quirk wore off. Then they could determine their next steps. The commission president smiled at the heroes he'd assembled. It was a nice smile, an expressive smile, one he had worked on for a long time. Right now, it said that he regretted the circumstances that brought them together, but that their presence cheered him. Nonetheless, it said that he was putting on a brave front while delivering grim news. It had a desired effect. The heroes leaned forward, with the exception of Hawks. Damn that stubborn child. Perhaps he was due for some retraining. I regret to inform you all that All Might, the former #1 hero, also known as Yagi Toshinori, has been abducted by the traitor Midoriya Izuku through the use of a mental quirk we believe he obtained from the villain All for One, publicly known as the Scourge as Kumino. Toshinori and Izuku had spoken to one another concerning hiding places and rendezvous points on several occasions. It was a necessity when engaged in a shadow war with a 200-year-old monster, and continued to be so even after the war had come into the light. Toshinori currently owned most of them, though through various serpentine paths, shell corporations and semi-fictitious holding companies, one could potentially, in theory, with great effort, reach Toshinori if one started with one hiding place and followed the horribly convoluted paper trail, but it was infinitely more difficult to start with Toshinori and arrive with one of the safe houses. Mainly because Toshinori had so many completely legitimate holdings. Some of these places were older than they were, inherited, much like their quirk, and the very oldest of these wasn't technically owned at all. It didn't exist on paper. It had been made by an unregistered quirk during the dawn of quirks, when the government was in shambles. Only 2 living people knew about it. Even All for One never found the place. We'll be safe here, said Toshinori, unnecessarily, as he opened the door. The hinges were silent. Toshinori had oiled them the last time he had restocked the pantry. Izuku nodded, then yawned. Everything about today was exhausting, and his brain still wasn't working right. But was it really okay for him to sleep, to rest, when he had left his friends behind? Why had he done that? Could he even call himself a friend when Toshinori put his hands on Izuku's shoulder, and Izuku let his concerns soak into his bones? The others were with him. Uraka, Todoroki, Ida, and Aizawa were not in danger. They reminded him. Izuku, 9, however, was. The others were in good standing with the Commission, more or less, and would likely remain so. For all the Suzuki's posturing, it appeared he had no real evidence against Izuku's friends. Otherwise, he would have used it for blackmail by now. Besides, Izuku wasn't the only one to make decisions to run. Izuku frowned. Was he? There was a bed in the little hidden house. Toshinori pulled a set of sheets out from the small cabinet and began to make it. Izuku retrieved and fluffed the pillows. It was interesting. He had never actually been here before. Toshinori only had told him how to get here, and yet, but the others had been here. 1 and 2 mostly, but 3 had come a few times, and 4 had gotten a lot of use out of it before he left the city entirely. 5 hadn't really needed it. He'd been a pro hero after all, but he'd kept the place up, just in case, and passed it on to 6 when it was time. 6 had been underground and had kept this place his ace in the hole, his fallback. 7 had learned of it from his notes since he hadn't lived long enough to tell her properly. So much had been lost. Izuku shook his head and focused on the bed. Wordlessly, he was coaxed into it. It would be better to sleep, for now. His attention wouldn't be divided, and Toshinori would keep him safe. "Trace," said the Commission President, looking at the second youngest hero present. The woman was just a little bit older than Hawks. "With your quirk, I think you know why you're called here." The woman, who usually worked as a rescue hero, nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'll need something of either Midoriya's or All Might's, and their last known location. We'll be able to rescue All Might in no time." Chapter 4. There was something wrong with the school, other than it being entirely within Midoriya's head. It was ominous, foreboding. The way the walls joined together was wrong. The colours on the posters clashed. The incomprehensible background noise made by the bright blurs was jeering, mocking. It reminded Aizawa too much of his old school, the one he went to before UA, of the looks and the hate he got just because his quirk frightened people. But Midoriya had a straightforward physical quirk. Correction, he appeared to have a straightforward physical quirk. Even if he had the bone-breaking problem, he shouldn't experience anything like that. Aizawa was shoved hard from behind, and that shouldn't have knocked him off balance, but it did. He tumbled painfully to the ground. There hadn't been anyone here to push him, except the blurs. He cursed inwardly to dismiss them. He realized as cruel laughter rose up around them. "They can touch us. Be careful," he said. "Yes, sir," said Ida, sporting a black eye already. "I apologize for my inattention." More laughter. An older but indistinct voice rose above the sound, along with the taller blur. A teacher. The condescension in his tone made Aizawa's teeth hurt. He caught sight of Suzuki ahead. "Come on," he said. "Let me try something, Sensei," said Todoroki. He raised his arms. The ice filled the hallway, pushing out to either side. The blurs ignored it. The G's increased in volume. Aizawa could make out individual words now. Useless and freak Good, thought Todoroki. He had a feeling that this was going to be difficult. The children looked at him in horror. Sensei, you're being encouraging? Just follow them, he replied back, pointing. He wanted hazard pay for this nonsense. Yes, sir, said Ida, zooming off. He immediately tripped again. Luckily, Suzuki didn't seem to be having much luck. The blurs, which Aizawa guessed were somehow Midoriya's memories of his former classmates, were just as violent as him. Aizawa couldn't see Midoriya anymore. One of the blurs scratched at Aizawa's side, murmured tauntingly. They passed a nurse's office, where nothing but cold words and cold winds emerged. The hallway smelled like smoke and sugar, and things that had to be related to quirks. There was a loud ringing overhead, and the blurs abruptly vanished. Despite the burns Aizawa had suffered, when did this occur? He forced himself to speed up. He almost caught Suzuki before he entered the classroom. Ida slipped on the tile floor, hitting him from behind, and all of them skidded into class as a tangled mess. Aizawa hadn't been this clumsy since he was in middle school. What was going on? Midoriya was sitting at a desk, hunching over and muttering. The desk, to put it nicely, was ruined, even from Aizawa's current perspective. He could make out some truly hateful things carved into the wood and metal. Aizawa dearly hoped this was exaggerated. Even so, he was going to seriously talk to Midoriya about therapy and taking legal action against this hellhole. What are you hiding? Gruffed Suzuki. You're also applying to UA, aren't you? Midoriya froze and buried his head in his arms. Aizawa, halfway up with the intent to stop whatever this was, felt himself freeze as well. This mindscape affected him far too much for his peace of mind. The ghosts laughed, long and hard and cruel. The teacher did nothing to stop it. Then Bakugo's shade exploded, literally. The smaller Midoriya barely had time to throw himself back, away from the blast. Midoriya's reflexes had much improved since middle school, but honestly, even this much was impressive for someone his age. Come on, Deku, forget the crappy quirks. You're totally useless. What? Aizawa missed the next several sentences as his mind whirred, trying to comprehend what he had just heard. But then another explosion brought him back. Bakugo's words, completely unmissable. If you think you'll have a quirk in your next life, go take a swan dive off the roof. Just like that, whatever was holding them in place broke. The ghosts faded away entirely, leaving the classroom empty except for them and Midoriya. Midoriya was shaking, fists clenched, tears running down his face. Are you happy now? Are you happy? Why couldn't you just let me... Me being quirkless in middle school isn't hurting anyone. Midoriya took several deep and uneven breaths, his shoulders trembling. Izuku, she said. Midoriya, flinching, looked up, his expression guarded. The first thing I'm going to do when we get out of here is punch Bakugo, she said cheerfully, one hand in her fist. Midoriya gaped, but some of the oppressive, terrified atmosphere dissipated. Aizawa sighed. Now that the immediate danger seemed to be over, he moved closer to Midoriya. He wasn't sure it was even possible to convert a memory, or fragment, or figment, or whatever this was. But he wanted to be between Midoriya and Suzuki, especially given that Suzuki seemed to be able to manipulate the environment to some extent. Plus ultra, agreed Todoroki. Uraka, Todoroki, gasped Ida, scandalized. You can't just punch a classmate outside of school supervised sparring. I love you, Ida, but you're a bit of a hypocrite sometimes, said Uraka, especially considering, she gestured vaguely at Ida's hands and Midoriya's face. Ida turned a funny color, then looked down at his hands. Oh my god, you're right, he whispered, horrified. What have I become? Besides, Aizawa is right there. Todoroki gestured to Aizawa. We can just ask him if we can't. No, interrupted Suzuki. That can't be it. Show me what you're hiding. He started forward, only to be jumped by 3 extremely annoyed hero students. Just to be safe, Aizawa activated his quirk and kept it trained on the man. Mind the gun, reminded Ida. Ah yes, the gun, which the man may or may not have recovered at any point due to the impairment in the nature of everything here. Lovely, Midoriya, said Aizawa. He's after you. Get out of here. Yes, Yes, sorry, Sensei. Midoriya bobbed in an incomplete bow and turned to the door. And there was that stupid gun. Aizawa wished he had his capture weapon back. Why are you keeping secrets? Demanded Suzuki, his voice echoing somewhat. Midoriya clutched his head and screamed, falling to his knees. His body vanished entirely, but the sound remained somehow. The classroom fell apart. Very briefly, Tenya recognized Hosu. The smoke, the alley, the distant, indistinct cries of Manuel. It wasn't the alley where he'd found Stain standing over Native. However, this was Midoriya's perspective. The scene shifted again, rapidly. They were now in the entrance tunnel to the sports festival arena. The air smelled of smoke. Todoroki startled, but it fell away. A hallway knew the smell of coffee. Then one of the soundproof conference rooms. Papers on a table, the writing all blacked out. Suzuki lunged for them. Aizawa punched him in the face. Another shift. A dilapidated apartment with footprints on the wall and ceilings. A microwave humming in the background. As soon as it dinged, they were elsewhere again. Back on the beach, the light was different. A single car still remained, and they were on a rooftop. The wind blew mournfully. Midoriya was standing at the edge, uniform in disarray, a burnt notebook clutched in one hand. Stop it! He shouted, almost doubled over. Stop it! Stop it! Stop it! Tenya took a step forward. Before he could fully assess the situation, he tried to grab Midoriya. There was a good chance he'd go right over the edge. There it is! That smile of his is just a mask. Of course it's just a mask. You idiot! Exclaimed Midoriya angrily. Angrily? Midoriya rarely got angry. I am clinically depressed. I have anxiety. This doesn't make me a villain. What are you, stupid? Are you on drugs? Is the whole commission on drugs? All Might's smile was a mask 90% of the time. And don't you dare tell me about Hawks' smile isn't a mask. Do you do this to too, you sicko? Suzuki had gone stiff. How do you know about that? Because I have functioning eyes, unlike virtually everyone else. Apparently. What is wrong with you? You aren't in any position to ask questions. What are you hiding? Questioned Suzuki. You really want to know? Do you? Do you, huh? Midoriya. Shut up, shut up, shut up! I can't take this anymore. This is so stupid. You want to know why this place is a secret? Fine. Fine. He threw his hands in the air. This is the first and last place I seriously considered suicide. Happy? The last was said with such incredible amount of venom that everyone took a step away from Midoriya. Suicide? said Tenya out loud, unable to stop himself. I didn't want to. Here, of course, filters stuff like that out. If they think you're gonna be a liability, are you happy now? You have my deep, dark secret. You know what I was like before, and Midoriya, said Aizawa gently, it's fine. UA doesn't filter for that. All you would have to do is attend extra counseling. Really? Said Midoriya. That can't be it, said Suzuki. He whipped his head around. There was someone else here. Who stopped you? Was this where All For One recruited you? What is wrong with you? Demanded Tenya, activating his quirk long enough to skid to a halt right in front of Suzuki. Suzuki looked past him, as if he weren't there. Who was with you? A faint breeze picked up. Without power, can one become a hero? No, I should think not. All Might? Said Oroka. All Might? Repeated Suzuki incredulously. The scene changed in a blink. They were in a pedestrian tunnel. Midoriya, as dishevelled and tiny as he was on the roof, leaned up against the wall, clearly wary of them in general, and Suzuki in particular. First contact, whispered a voice that dragged across Tenya's mind like the end of a silk curtain. First contact, said Suzuki. What is that supposed to? Hey! They turned to see a figure standing beyond the tunnel's mouth in the sunlight. They were tall and slender, perhaps as tall as Tenya, and wearing a hoodie and a disposable medical mask. The voice sounded oddly familiar, but Tenya couldn't place it. It sounded like the owner was about their age. Huh, said Suzuki, this guy definitely is Midoriya. You have to admit, are these guys bothering you? Asked the boy in the hoodie. Yes. Well, don't worry now, because I am here. Are you a vigilante? Guessed Tenya, as the unknown boy stepped into the tunnel. Many of them had an appreciation for All Might. Sure, said the boy cheerfully. Mutant-based speed enhancement, muttered Izuku, sliding across the wall towards the boy. Fire and ice user, 5-point activation mass alteration, quirk negation with secondary minor telekinesis, some kind of thought and memory manipulation, possibly a form of telepathy that allows him to alter the local environment as a side effect. May have a truth detection component. A thread of ice wound down Tenya's back. Even he didn't believe that Midoriya was a traitor, that he was giving information about them so freely to this stranger, as if they were enemies, was chilling, even if it did evolve, that this was just a figment of his imagination. Ha! It'll take more than that to get rid of me, said the vigilante, pointing a thumb at his chest. If Tenya was mistaken, however, there was a bit of a wobble in his voice. Mass alteration can act like freefall. No conscious control how much mass is altered. Can only reduce mass, continues Midoriya, now hiding behind the taller boy. Ceiling of absolute temperature alteration from average is lower than fire than for ice. Speed enhancement can be used to power kicks, mind the capture weapon, scarf. Understood. The vigilante lunged for Suzuki, threw him bodily into Aizawa. While the adults were recovering, the students finally flanked the stranger. He attempted to throw Uraka in the same way, but she just got him with her quirk, and he floated towards the ceiling, which he kicked off with enough power in the movement to clock Todoroki in the jaw. Tenya attempted to apply a kick at the vigilante's exposed, but still floating back, but was nearly stabbed in the eye with a pencil by Midoriya. Sorry, said Midoriya breathlessly. Sorry, I didn't do this for real. I thought about it, but I didn't, sorry. You thought about stabbing me in the eye? No, Muscular, the sludge villain. I thought maybe I should have, he muttered rapidly, becoming unintelligible. Tenya was distracted enough by the muttering that he took a second longer than he should have to react to Midoriya. Midoriya going after his bad shoulder, the tip of the pencil dug right into it. Sorry, this is a dream. I know it hurts, I'm sorry. Disengage, shouted Aizawa. There's no point in fighting these guys. The hell there isn't, said Suzuki. Dissension among the ranks, villains? Asked the Vigilante. Hey, complained Uraraka, don't lump us in with him. The Vigilante somehow got a hold of Aizawa again. Despite his young experience, he had a lot more skill than Ida or even Midoriya. Aizawa managed to get a blow across the boy's face, Knuckles knocking his hood and mask askew, and you recognized that smile anywhere. With the floppy bangs they had all come to know. All Might? Toshinori tried to ignore his growing headache as he laid out supplies. Izuku was sleeping, and they were safe for now, but it would be foolish of them to assume that the Hero Commission would just let Izuku disappear. Infinite variety of quirks in the world, all but guaranteed that someone with a tracking quirk would be after them, and soon. Thus, it became important to disguise themselves. In this day and age, the easiest way to do that was to make them look like you had a quirk other than your own. The bulky coat he had selected included a high collar and an apparatus that covered everything below the eye, suggesting a disturbing or difficult to control mutation. Of course, he'd also have to wear sunglasses. His eyes were unfortunately distinctive. The hair would also have to go. For Izuku, though he couldn't stand the thought of completely cutting his hair off, it would look strange in someone so young. Anyway, so instead he retrieved the hair bleach, white hair, combined with his suit and properly worn tie, and make him appear older. Lifts in his shoes would add to that impression. The computer pinged. Aizawa went to it and made a face. He wasn't technologically inclined at all, but Six was. The computer was old, but Six was very good, and large organizations only rarely changed their protocols. The Commission had their tracker, a young hero named Trace. She was on her way to UA. The details of her quirk, yes. They could potentially even keep her away from the safe house. If they took the opportunity to cross their paths, they would have to start preparing to leave now. Izuku woke with a gasp and an anguished cry, the pain in it echoed by a spike in Toshinori's headache. Toshinori rushed to the room. What's wrong, my boy? They're not in my head anymore, said Izuku, knotting his fingers in his hair. That's a good thing, isn't it? Asked Toshinori, even as he knew it wasn't. Izuku shook his head. They're not in my head anymore. They're in yours. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed these chapters. It was a bit intense, but finally we got to the first stage. Well, we're past the first bit, where we finished all of Midoriya's introduction stuff. Now moving on to more action stuff, I promise. Anyway, hope you enjoyed. Bye.